This is Ringler Radio, where you get all the latest news and information about structured settlements from Ringler Associates, the first name in structured settlements, helping injured people and their families since 1975. Ringler Radio is made possible in part by Allstate, American General, The Hartford, John Hancock, Liberty Mutual, MetLife, Mutual of Omaha, New York Life, Pacific Life, and Prudential. Now join Ringler Radio host Larry Cohen.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Ringler Radio. I'm Larry Cohen, head of Ringler Associates Northeast Operations, and we're certainly glad you could join us today. Well, I know we're all familiar with the massive BP oil spill and the Deepwater Horizon explosion about 50 miles from Louisiana's coastal wetlands that occurred a few years ago. That explosion and fire on the oil rig killed 11 workers and injured 17 others, and the oil spill that followed is the largest in U.S. history, creating an environmental and economic disaster affecting the entire Gulf Coast region. Well, on March 2nd, a very interesting thing occurred when BP agreed to settle the class action of certain oil spill-related claims with the Plaintiffs Steering Committee, representing the interests of individuals and businesses throughout the region. Today on Ringler Radio, in light of the recent settlement, we're going to discuss the various aspects of that settlement, including the important major changes in how claims will now be administered and in this new process that we're going to talk about. And to help us do that, my co-host today is going to be Bob Caples. Bob is our Ringler associate in Houston, Texas. He manages that office and has over 15 years' experience in the structured settlement industry, and I'm certainly happy to have him as our co-host today. Welcome, Bob.
Larry, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
It's a pleasure to have you. And joining us today, to discuss this very important topic is Rhon Jones from the Beasley Allen law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. Rhon is one of the 15 attorneys chosen for the Plaintiffs Steering Committee in the multidistrict litigation related to the BP oil spill. And that multidistrict litigation is filed in Louisiana, and Beasley Allen currently represents approximately 1,000 businesses and individuals harmed by the disaster. And you're very involved in this, Rhon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, Rhon, before we discuss the recent settlement, you've been integrally involved in the litigation. Give us a little history. In 2010, BP established a $20 billion fund, which was called the Gulf Coast Claims Facility, to review claims and provide compensation, and it was managed by Ken Feinberg. Tell us about that fund, how it was working, and what some of its problems were. What kind of led to up to this recent settlement? And tell us about that.
Yes, I think that the Ken Feinberg-led fund was probably doing the best that it could do under the circumstances. The way I look at it is it probably did the best it could with the hand that it was dealt, so to speak. Mm-hmm. They definitely had their share of difficulties and criticism, but I think on the whole they were doing the best they could. They just had a difficult situation to manage, and hopefully the settlement, which is as of now, is in principle, and we hope that it will be reduced to a final version very soon. Mm-hmm. We think it's a big victory for Gulf Coast workers, businesses, families. We think it's going to provide more transparency than there was before. We think people are going to have confidence in it because it's court supervised. So, I think it was the court and all the lawyers working on the case did, I think, an admirable job of moving it forward quickly. Because keep in mind, we're still less than 2 years from the date of this disaster. Right. So to move it forward this quickly when you compare it with an Exxon Valdez or other situations like that, I think is truly remarkable.
Well, Rhon, I think our listeners would benefit if you could kind of help paint a picture for us. Can you give us some specifics on how the spill affected the Gulf Coast region and maybe include how these same people are going to be helped through this proposed settlement?
Sure. I think that if you're familiar with the Gulf Coast, and even if you're not, there are many businesses and individuals there that are literally dependent upon the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, for their way of life. Now, that could be something as simple as someone who has a catch of fish or shrimp, and they actually use what we call subsistence. They use those resources to eat, to barter, to trade with. That's their way of life, up through tourism businesses that really can't function without the tourists coming to the Gulf Coast. And then, of course, you have the seafood harvesting industry, which, whether it be shrimp or finfish or oysters, crab, what have you, they need a healthy Gulf of Mexico, for their ability to make a living. And, of course, that seafood, Gulf seafood, goes from, the Gulf through the harvester. It has to be processed and made ready for sale in restaurants and other retail establishments. So, it's certainly if tourists are not there in regular numbers, and if the Gulf is not healthy from an ecological or from a species point of view, that makes things very difficult for those people that I just mentioned.
Well, Ron, in this new settlement, it looks like there's going to be three basic groups of individuals or claimants that are going to be able to now seek some recovery. And I know some of these folks had some problems in trying to recover against the Gulf Fund that was set up a couple of years ago. Tell us about the three groups. And those three groups are economic loss groups, which are the individuals and businesses that suffered from the oil spill. Then the medical benefits group, which are the cleanup workers and residents which suffered acute or chronic illnesses from the exposure. And then, of course, property owners and lessees of waterfront properties that are now going to be eligible for compensation. So if you want to take them one at a time, why don't you talk about the economic loss, the businesses that suffered from the spill. How are they going to be compensated now, potentially differently in the fund under the settlement than they would have been under the Feinberg deal?
Okay. Well, let's go through the basic categories that at least I believe fall under the economic loss. And there are six basic categories there under this. You had it exactly right. You've got your economic and property class settlement, and then you've got your medical class settlement. So under the economic and property, I look at six areas. First, an individual or business that had an economic loss. That could be a business, a restaurant, a hotel. It could be an individual who had wage loss. It could be any category under that. Mm-hmm. And then second, you've got damage to actual waterfront property on the beachfront or wetland areas. In other words, if during the cleanup operation or during the spill, your property was actually damaged in some way, then you're eligible for compensation. Third is if you have a coastal property, and this is one of the areas that was not something that was covered under the previous fund. If you're on the coast and you have it stands to reason you were able to use your property less in 2010 during the spill than you would have been previous to it. So there will be a formula in place that will provide compensation for those property owners who were unable to use their property or unable to use it as they would have in 2010. And again, it's really a loss of use and enjoyment. But again, it's based on the property ownership and something that was not available under the Feinberg Fund. There's loss of subsistence use, which we talked about earlier. There's a great number of people along the coast who have been involved in a either commercial or fisherman lifestyle, and they normally will either hold back part of their catch. In other words, they use that food to survive. That's what they actually use to eat and exist. So those claims are now eligible for compensation. And there may have been a few of those that were paid under the fund, but there really wasn't any no volume to it at all, and there really wasn't a framework that everyone found acceptable. So we think that's another big victory in this settlement. There's the vessels of opportunity charter claims, and those have been much discussed on the Gulf Coast. People who who contracted for their vessel to be chartered for use by BP or cleanup during the time period. They have a formula now that allows them compensation. And then finally, number 6, the seafood harvesting we touched on earlier. This would include essentially everyone, deckhands, captains, vessel owners, everyone in the harvesting business with the Gulf species, which is primarily your shrimp, oyster, crab, and finfish. So those are 6 broad areas that are covered. I believe that the formula and the methods, the multipliers, the different things that go into achieving a final number for these types of claims that I just listed, I believe that it will be better than anything that was being done under the Feinberg Fund. Again, I think they did the best they could do with what they had to work with.
Well, let me clarify. Let me one thing, Ron. Let me clarify. When you mentioned the coastal property claims, you're talking about both individual homeowners who lost the use of their property, the enjoyment of their property. You're also talking about businesses like motels and other entities that lost business because of the Gulf. Both of those types are going to be compensated under this new settlement. Is that right?
That's correct. And when I think of the loss of use and enjoyment, this is not the only category that would fall under it. But of course, I generally think of someone who owned, let's just say you were in a condominium unit that was beachfront, or you owned a piece of property, a home or a rental unit, what have you. And if you own that property and it's on the coast, then you are eligible to participate in the formula for the payment for loss of use and enjoyment of that property. Now, as well, if you have a business entity that's on the beach as well, could be a souvenir shop, could be a restaurant. Of course, those properties are also eligible. Well, not those properties; those businesses rather are also eligible to be compensated for their loss in revenue per our new formula that will be part of the class settlement, which I think is a better formula than what had been used before in the fund.
Let's talk about another very important part of the settlement, and that's the medical benefits side of the equation. Tell us about how the medical needs of some of these folks who have been exposed to some of these toxins are going to be able to be compensated in this fund, whereas they may not have been in the Feinberg Fund.
Right. Briefly, you have 3 categories of individuals that will be in the medical benefits settlement class. You've got your cleanup workers, and then you have what we call Zone A residents and Zone B residents. And cleanup workers are kind of obvious. Those are people who were working in the cleanup during the time, primarily during 2010, May to December 2010. And then your Zone A, without getting into too great a detail, those are generally people who reside within 1/2 mile of a beach, a coastal area that was being cleaned up for at least 60 days. And then Zone B moves to approximately 1 mile for at least 60 days. And again, the time period is primarily post-spill through the end of 2010. And there are, certain areas that were oiled. And so, without going into the detail of every, single part of that zone, that's what you're talking about. And you're trying to, the idea is you're trying to cover the people that would have been exposed through cleanup or through no fault of their own, just where they resided or where they were for a period of time after the spill.
And what type of medical conditions are you contemplating that they're going to be compensated for? What types of things?
Well, let's start with just the idea of what the benefits are. There's going to be creation of a compensation program rather for specified physical conditions. There's going to be another program that's a periodic medical consultation program, which I think is very important. There's a provision for those people who may have a later manifested condition, which it's not obviously not apparent now. And then there's going to be the creation of a Gulf Region Health Outreach Program. So, I personally believe the medical benefit settlement is just as important as any economic part of this settlement, because you're going to be taking, certain conditions that you would see, whether they be acute, that is conditions that are short term and don't exist now, or chronic, that are those that are still existing. And you're going to have, I don't want to go through every one of them, but I mean, respiratory, eye, skin irritation,
sure.
Neurophysiological. You're going to have a lot of things that are going to fall under that. The idea being that if you have a problem that is either no longer there, or if it is there and it can be quantified, for lack of a better word, then those people would have the option of participating. And then if there's something that manifests itself later, you're not losing anything in that regard. If you are unfortunate and have some later manifestation, there are provisions for that. And I'm really proud of the medical consultation program and the Gulf Region Health Outreach Program. Obviously those are things that are going to be developed and have more impact over time. But I think the idea that there's a way for people to be have consultations over time is pretty important.
Well, Ron, those are everything you just said is clearly informational for us. I mean, there's some huge developments coming from that settlement. Thank you for explaining it so well. And we all know that so many thousands of people have been affected by this disaster, and sometimes it's hard to kind of appreciate or personalize what really does happen to some of these folks. And we were wondering if maybe you could share with us a real life story of someone who was impacted from this disaster and where they are today.
Well, we have, whether they're our clients or not, there's so many people that are impacted. And let me just say, you bring up a good point. This case, this whole process, it's not about lawyers. It's not about me. It's not about any firm. It's about the people who have been impacted. They are the ones who this case is about. They're the ones who deserve the compensation. And to mention one, I'm scared I would leave thousands out. But I can say that having been down on the coast a great deal, having looked a lot of these people in the eye and talked with them at length, you just have individuals and businesses, whether they be seafood or tourism or some other type of business, who, this was a real devastating event. A lot of them were able to withstand the punch, so to speak, and they had some crisis times, but either through the GCCF fund, through some interim payment, or through what we're hopefully about to provide for them through this class settlement, then they're going to be able to make it. There are lots of businesses, though, that have failed. There are lots of startups that were, just crushed, and we're going to try and provide some compensation for those businesses also. I realize that when you get into failed businesses and startups, it's a little more difficult. But there were so many individuals and so many businesses who just, this was just like they really were felt like with previous issues on the Gulf, whether it be Katrina or other issues, they were really just starting to trend up again. With the economy and all the other issues that may be out there, they were trending up right about the time the spill hit, and so The timing of it was devastating. Many of these businesses on the Gulf Coast really, their season will start somewhere around spring break or Memorial Day, and it will be pretty heavy through Labor Day, and so the timing was just terrible. They were hit during the time of year when they really make the vast majority of their income. So thank goodness many of the businesses were able to withstand it. They may have had to do some things to get by as far as their financing or what have you, but we were thankful for those that have survived, and hopefully they can go through this process and then thrive again. There are many individuals who either had to pick up and move to another part of the country,
sure,
or had to change professions, or had to be laid off, and of course individuals that are going to be compensated through this process are a very important part of it also. There are just so many. I probably couldn't name any one, but
sure.
The hurt for these people was so real, and and I haven't even really touched on the seafood industry. When you have a way of life that is commonly multi-generational, and you have 3, 4, 5th, 6th generation fishermen, and then they have a year, at least a year, where there's absolute chaos and uncertainty, and and we're still even facing today. We're hoping for the best, and we want everything to be back in order. But for the seafood harvesting industry, there are questions that remain, and hopefully this process will be fair and transparent for those people. I believe it will. But it's just the impact. I know there's a tendency for for us to be on a 24 or 48 hour news cycle, it seems like. But even though this is coming up on 2 years, the impact is absolutely still there.
Well, it's funny, Ron. I can imagine the people living on that Gulf Coast have to be wondering, what the heck have they done to deserve what they've got the last few years between Katrina and this? It's just terrible for the folks down there. And I guess the other issue that we face with this new settlement is that I'm assuming that there were quite a few folks who were in the midst of dealing with the Feinberg Fund and maybe getting settlements or agreeing on dollars, and now that essentially gets shut down. How is it going to work for someone who is involved with the Feinberg Fund to try to get their money, and now all of a sudden they're going to be shifting, if this is approved, over to a new fund? What happens to those people? Are they going to get a percentage of their money? How does that work?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to clarify some things on that. No one, first off, no one is going to have to start over. If the transition process is ongoing as we speak, and there will be a new administrator, obviously, who's already been named, Pat Juneau, who's a well-respected lawyer here in Louisiana, and I think he'll do a fabulous job. Lynn Greer, Brown Greer, is still working on the claims administration end. So the records that have been submitted, the things that are still there are absolutely still there. If someone had a final offer that was pending, they're not going to be left out in the cold. They're going to be able to accept 60% of that offer as an interim payment with no strings attached, and then they'll, it will depend on whether they would ultimately be a class member or not. But they will essentially, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, have the option to take that remaining 40%, as the remainder of their final payment and sign a release, or, and this is important for those class members who want to take advantage, they'll have the opportunity to see what our new formulas, which again I think are better than what was being used before. They'll have the option to look at that and see if that's greater than the remaining 40%, and if it is greater, they'll be able to take that. Of course, at the very end of the process, I mean, you have to subtract out what you've already been paid, when you're talking about calculating your total or final loss. But again, I believe our formula is going to be much, much more beneficial. And as it becomes final and public, I think the businesses are going to be ecstatic about the manner in which they're going to be able to calculate their loss compared to how it was being calculated under the fund. So, essentially there really is no change. They're really getting the best of both worlds. The process will continue into transition, and if people, even if you want to submit claims now and operate under the GCCF rules, I believe you still have that option. And then when the claim center is operational and in that the settlement is finalized and sort of thing, then they'll be able to operate under the new rules. So I really don't, I'm struggling to think of a situation where there's any bad situation for an existing claimant.
Very good. And it sounds to me like Pat Juneau is going to have quite a job ahead of him entertaining the specifics or the proof that's going to be provided by all these various businesses and entities. It's a big job, huge job.
It is a huge job, but let me tell you a couple of things. I think that this process is going to be better received and less criticized than the previous process. The formula, the manner in which payments are going to be made are going to be completely transparent, and everybody who submits a claim is going to know up front how the claim was calculated. There's not going to be any issues of it being calculated one way in one claims office and one way in another. Mm-hmm. The formula will be out there. There'll be transparency. This process, again, with no disrespect to the Feinberg Fund, this process will be working under court supervision of a federal district judge. The parties and the claims administrator will be reporting regularly. The claims facility will now kind of gravitate to the coast. It will be headquartered in New Orleans with another office in Hammond. There'll be call centers and other offices that will be along the coast. This will now be a truly coastal situation. There will not be any, Midwest or Northeast operations. This will be a truly coastal operation, and I agree with you. It will be a big job, but I think when people are aware of what the rules are, so to speak, they may not agree with every one of them, but I think they're going to respect the fact that they're out there, and it's going to give people, the ability to make a clear choice.
Very good. Well, let's take a quick break right now and be back in just a minute with more on Ringler Radio. We'll be right back.
You can listen to all the Ringler Radio shows. Just go to ringlerassociates.com or LegalTalkNetwork.com and click on Ringler Radio and choose from almost 200 topics. There's a Ringler Associate in all the major cities of the U.S. No one has more experience than a Ringler Associate. Check out our new website at www.ringlerassociates.com for the best information for claimants, legal professionals, and claims personnel, and to find the Ringler Associate nearest you. We invite you to listen to our other shows on the Legal Talk Network. It's free at www.legaltalknetwork.com.
Someone's at the door.
Don't answer it.
Why not?
I'm listening to Legal Talk Network podcasts to get my CLE credit in West Legal Ed Center.
Oh, I need to do that too. Where do I find them?
It's easy. Just go to LegalTalkNetwork.com and pick a program for CLE, click on it, and start listening. Or go to WestLegalEdCenter.com and choose from any of the Legal Talk Network programs available for CLE.
Perfect. I'll do that right now.
Think you might like to have us create your own podcast on LegalTalkNetwork.com? Go to the website and send us an email, or just give us a call at 781-551-9960. It's the best move you'll make in legal marketing. You never have enough friends or followers, right? Check out Legal Talk Network on Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn too.
Welcome back to Ringler Radio. Glad you could join us. And I'm joined by my co-host Bob Caples from our Houston Ringler office and attorney Rhon Jones from the Beasley Allen law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. You know, Ron, according to the settlement that we've been talking about, there's another element not so much associated with what happened on March 2nd, but there's a whole area of the environmental cleanup, the clean water that the U.S. government is pursuing. And one of the issues there was that usually when penalties and funds are given to the government, they're not allocated to specific states. But I understand that the Senate recently passed legislation that says that I think at least 80% of what's ever collected in penalties from BP are going to be passed on to the Gulf states involved in this particular debacle. Is that true? I mean, is that what you've heard?
I probably know as much as you do, just from an overview perspective. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's been any bill that's been passed and signed, but I do understand that there was an amendment to the transportation bill, perhaps, that was approved, and I think it still needs, I'm not sure if it was done by the Senate, needs the House approval or vice versa, but I do think there is and
it needs the president's signature, too. It needs the president's signature. In that process. Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting because it's unique that the funds will be allocated to the Gulf states and not to the entire, 50 states, not to the federal, coffers. So that's going to be a very beneficial move. If it can be passed and signed, it'll be very beneficial for the Gulf.
I would think so, too. I don't really know enough about it to probably speak intelligently, but I think it would be a big victory for the Gulf states, and whether it happens or not, I don't really know. But okay. I agree with your assessment. That would be, with all the different things that have happened in the Gulf, that would be a wonderful result for those Gulf states.
I agree, Ron. Hey, Ron, could you help us out, please, by maybe shedding some light on what the next steps are for the settlement between BP and the claimants?
Yes, I think that what will happen is we'll take the agreement in principle that we've reached. It will be reduced to writing. That work is ongoing, and then the transition process will turn into a full-blown claims processing center under the new rules in court supervision. And, without giving specific dates, I mean, I could say, we want these things to happen as quickly as they can, and I think they will happen rather quickly. The new claims processing will be up and running with transparency, court supervision, with formulas and rules that are out there for everybody to see, and those who are within the class definition, within the geography, can participate and hopefully get their claims paid and move forward. I did not add this earlier, but I did just want to point this out, that the claims process, for those who are familiar with class action cases, this is rather unusual. The claims made process is going to begin immediately. So the claims can be made and paid, and that can happen before there's a preliminary approval or notice is complete. In other words, the legal class action process can go on one track, and claims can be made and paid on another. There's no waiting around to make sure that certain legal class action aspects in the court are done before the claims can be paid, and I think that's going to be very good for the claimants.
Well, I'm sure that as part of this Plaintiffs Steering Committee, you're very much involved in waiting on the judge to make sure that he puts his stamp of approval on this process, that Pat Juneau can get started on his work, and you can get some of these people some of the relief they deserve.
Well, absolutely, and I would be remiss if I didn't say what a wonderful job that the court and all the lawyers have done for Judge Barbier and Magistrate Shushin to move this case from where it was to where it is now. I'm not sure I can think of any case at any time that has moved with this much efficiency and this much speed. And you have to credit the court here for moving this along, and what a fantastic job they've done.
And you said it before, Ron, and I think I will close with this, but it must be somewhat comforting to know that the process is going to be down in Louisiana where all this really began. And it's not up somewhere else in Washington or New York. It's right down where the people that were most affected. And I think that's going to help everyone deal with it maybe a little bit better.
I think so too. And again, they're impacted people in Louisiana and even in a small part of Texas and Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, the Panhandle. I mean, again, the fact that it's going to be Gulf Coast based, I think, is a big victory. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. This is about the people who have suffered loss wherever they are along the coast. So I think the closer it can be, the better.
Well, we wish you all the luck, and I know you got a lot of work ahead of you, and hopefully it'll all work to the benefit of those folks to get their lives back in order. And Ron, if someone wanted to reach you, how would they do that?
Oh, gosh, I believe our www.beasleyallen.com is out there. And with the internet nowadays, it's fairly easy. So that would be probably the primary way to contact us.
It's got all your contact information there, and it probably has information even about the spill and the settlement, I assume.
It does. And so it's out there.
Terrific. And Bob, how about yourself? If someone wants to reach you, how would they do that?
Well, Larry, thanks. They could either go to www.ringlerassociates.com to find my webpage, or they could just call direct at 281-937-9090.
Well, I want everyone out there to know that you can reach any Ringler Associate on ringlerassociates.com, and you can, of course, hear all Ringler Radio shows on ringlerassociates.com or legaltalknetwork.com. I want you to know you can download those shows. You can listen to them on your iPod or anytime you want. It's a very convenient way to do it. And I encourage you to do that and listen in. And sometimes when you hear a show more than once, you really get the essence of it. And Ron, I want to thank you for joining us with your expertise. That was very helpful today.
Well, glad to do it. Thank you for having me on.
And Bob, thanks for being a co-host. You were great.
Well, thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
And to all of our listeners out there, let's go out and have a great day. Bye-bye.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. Thanks for listening to Ringler Radio, celebrating its 7th year on Legal Talk Network with over 1 million listeners. Ringler Associates, the first name in structured settlements. Visit ringlerassociates.com today.